confront the killing of good, we must also confront the killing of truth. The recent claim by President Trump that the 1964 Civil Rights Act harmed white Americans is just wrong, and it's dangerous. It rewrites history in a way that fuels fear and resentment. My fathers and so many leaders of the movement, Fred Shuttlesworth, Diane Nash, John Lewis, I can call the roll, but I won't do it today, did not risk their lives to divide this nation. They did not risk their lives to divide this nation. They did so because America was denying millions basic rights, the right to work, the right to vote, to live where they please, to move through society with dignity. The Civil Rights Act did not give black people special treatment. It made discrimination illegal. The same discrimination you're trying to turn around and use. It required the law to protect everyone equally. That is democracy.
I'm a civil rights attorney. You need to hear what Donald Trump did tonight. He issued an executive order claiming to repeal the heart of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 is the Civil Rights Act. It's the big one. It's the one that you've heard about. It's the one that Martin Luther King marched and campaigned for to pass in the civil rights movement. If you've ever heard of the March on Washington, or if you've ever heard Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, those were part of the campaign to pass this law. It protects against discrimination or segregation on the basis of race, sex, or religion in public accommodations, which would be businesses or buses or anything like that, schools, and by employers. This is the law that prevents your employer from discriminating against you on the basis of your race or sex or your religion. It's why we can't have segregated lunch counters or businesses that have separate facilities for black people or white people. It's the law that prevents schools from being segregated. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 relies on a standard called disparate impact. Essentially, if an employer or a public accommodation, a business, has a policy that has a disparate impact on the basis of race, sex, or religion, then they have a high burden to meet to show that that's necessary. Otherwise, it's discriminatory and it's not allowed. And this is really important because otherwise, you would have to show that discriminatory policies are intentionally discriminatory. And that's really hard to do. Most people aren't open about when they discriminate. It's the disparate impact standard that makes these laws work. And so what Trump is claiming to do here is repeal the federal regulations that enforce the disparate impact standard. With these regulations gone, the law would be virtually unenforceable. Now, I want to be super clear about this. He can't actually do this. He can't change the law. This isn't statute, and he can't rewrite it as a president. Also, the federal regulations, in order to change them, you have to go through a process, and he hasn't done that either. But he's claiming the power to just repeal it by executive order. And what's scary right now is that a lot of people are treating Trump's executive orders as if they're law. They're just obeying in advance, as if there's no process or that whole system has been repealed. This law was fought for by Martin Luther King Jr. This law is one of the triumphs of the civil rights movement, like the one that you've heard about, that you've seen in books and pictures. This is the law that was fought by segregationists and racists in the South. The reason you would repeal this law, you would try to gut its enforcement, is because you believe in white supremacy. You believe in a segregated society where you are allowed to discriminate against people on the basis of race. That's what their ultimate goal is here. They talk about it all the time if you pay attention. They talk about things like, quote, freedom of association. What they mean by that is the freedom to associate with people of your own race, to segregate, to do the things that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 forbids. The most important mass movement in American history was to pass this law. And now Donald Trump is getting rid of it. He is a white supremacist, full stop.
We, as law enforcement community, have been receiving endless complaints about civil rights violations from U.S. citizens. What we're hearing is they're being stopped in traffic stops or on the street with no cause and being forced to demand paperwork to determine if they are here legally. We started hearing from our police officers the same complaints as they fell victim to this while off duty. Every one of these individuals is a person of color who has had this happen to them. One particular officer that shared her story with me was stopped as she passed ICE going down the roadway. When they boxed her in, they demanded her paperwork, of which she's a U.S. citizen and clearly would not have any paperwork. When she became concerned about the rhetoric and the way she was being treated, she pulled out her phone. In an attempt to record the incident, the phone was knocked out of her hands, preventing her from recording it. The officer had their guns drawn during this interaction, and after the officer became so concerned, they were forced to identify themselves as a Brooklyn Park police officer in hopes of slowing the incident and de-escalating the incident down. The agents then immediately left after hearing this, making no other comments, no other apologies, just got in their vehicles and left. I wish I could tell you that this was an isolated incident. In fact, many of the chiefs standing behind me have similar incidents with their off-duty officers. This isn't just important because it happened to off-duty police officers, but what it did do is we know that our officers know what the Constitution is, they know what right and wrong is, and they know when people are being targeted, and that's what they were. If it is happening to our officers, it pains me to think of how many of our community members are falling victim to this every day. It has to stop.
Welcome back to the Freedom Room, where we uncover the stories behind events that changed the world. Today we are exploring the real story behind civil rights movement, the struggle, the sacrifices, and the people who fought to transform America. When many people hear about civil rights movement, they often think only about famous speeches, marches, and a few well-known leaders. But behind those historic moments was a much larger movement built by ordinary people who focused enormously on risks to demand justice and equality. From the fight against segregation and voters' discrimination to the battles for equal education, the battles for equal employment and basic human dignity, civil rights, among others. Civil rights movement was a turning point in American history. But how did the movement begin? How did civil rights movements begin? Who were the forgotten people behind the change? And what challenges remain even after important laws were passed? Stay with us. This is the Freedom Room as we uncover the deeper story behind one of America's most influential movements. First, let's watch some more clips together, and when we'll come back with more commentary. Stay tuned to the Freedom Room and watch to the end.
When Black Americans started demanding civil rights, they weren't just trying to sit at a lunch counter. They were forcing the federal government to pick a side. That's what was happening. And once the federal government picked a side, once they created enforcement, that enforcement didn't magically stop at one group. That's the part people miss. Before 1964, if your company didn't hire you because you were a woman, because you had an accent, because your name sounded foreign, there wasn't much you could do federally. After the Civil Rights Act, specifically Title VII, the government had actual power to investigate workplace discrimination. And the law didn't just say Black. It said race, color, religion, sex, national origin. That language matters. And I'm going to tell you why. Women used it to challenge sexism. Latino workers used it. Asian Americans used it. Religious minorities used it. And decades later, LGBTQ workers leaned on that same legal framework in court. That enforcement spine was built because Black people forced it to be built, specifically Black Americans. Other communities just walked through it. And immigration, let's talk about that. Before 1965, U.S. immigration law openly favored white Europeans. It was engineered that way. Now, after the moral logic of civil rights took hold, after the country publicly said radical hierarchy is wrong, those quotas became harder to defend. So the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 changes the game. And suddenly, you see more immigration from the Caribbean, from Africa, from Asia, from Latin America. The America that people argue about today, the multilingual, layered, global America. That demographic is tied to civil rights logic. Once you say race can't determine rights at home, it gets real awkward to keep race determining who can enter the country. That's probably what that orange buffoon meant when he said that civil rights actually hurt white people. But here's what actually moves me. The people who forced these changes, they weren't powerful on paper. They were teenagers, preachers, domestic workers, students, regular people who were just tired. They didn't have armies, they had discipline. They understood that if you expose a country's contradictions long enough, especially when that country is claiming to be the leader of the free world, it's going to either reform or embarrass itself globally. So they used that pressure strategically. And when the country finally moved, it built tools that it couldn't fully control anymore. Once you create federal mechanisms to fight discrimination, you can't decide only one group gets to use them. That's the quiet genius of it all. So how did it help more than just Black people? Because it forced the country to hardwire anti-discrimination into federal law. It reshaped immigration. It created enforcement that other communities could lean on. It changed the architecture, not perfectly, not permanently, but fundamentally. And the pride in that isn't loud, it's just steady. Because people who were told that they didn't belong reshaped the legal structure of belonging for themselves and for everyone else who came after. This is why it's important to know history.
So apparently Harriet Tubman wasn't real because that wasn't her real name. Let's talk about what's actually going on and why this kind of take is dangerous. Harriet Tubman was born Araminta Ross, yes. But like other enslaved people, she changed her name after gaining freedom. Harriet was her mother's name. Tubman came from her husband. However, the real question isn't, was she real? It's why her story gets told the way it does. We're taught she was a conductor at the Underway Railroad. True. They leave out the fact that she was armed. She led a military raid. And she worked as a spy for the Union Army. And although you should absolutely question who gets to be celebrated in history and why, because like in South Africa, Mandela is globally praised, but what about Chris Hani? Silenced, unalived. That's the pattern. But the answer isn't to erase the ones we do know. It's to dig deeper. It's to read wider. Don't fall for surface level doubt disguised as critical thinking. It's not. Our history is already buried and we don't need to do that ourselves all over again. So let's start reading books and let's maybe put the TikTok down.
Border Patrol agents used plastic explosives to blow off the front door of a family home in Huntington Park, narrowly missing a mother and her children.
A kid was going to Arleta High School in my district, a kid with autism, and was detained outside of his high school.
We've seen protesters here in California be permanently blinded with rubber bullets. Keith Porter was murdered by an off-duty ICE agent.
Another constituent in Commerce in my district was dragged off the street into an unmarked black SUV by masked agents just last week.
An elderly woman, a vendor in my district, was shoved to the ground and got a heart attack.
We are seeing members of our communities, families, businesses, schools, government agencies impacted multiple times a day.
Reports out of Los Angeles are that ICE agents are using tear gas and flash grenades to disperse crowds of protesters who are blocking their way to entering a donut shop and a Home Depot to look for undocumented immigrants and arrest them. Under the Department of Homeland Security's own policies, the use of force can only be used when there is imminent threat of death or physical danger to that particular agent. Less lethal force like tear gas could be used proportionately. ICE's job is not riot control, and it's certainly not criminal enforcement. And protesters in the United States are entitled to protest. There is something called the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. And using force to disperse a protest in order to enforce a civil administrative order is certainly constitutionally questionable. Meaning, you just can't use force against protesters because they're standing in your way. This is not a criminal arrest. During the George Floyd protest, DHS was criticized for using force to protect federal property. But what we're seeing here in Los Angeles, if true, is much different. ICE is not protecting federal property. They're pushing forward into crowds with force, not to protect themselves, not to protect federal property, but to make civil immigration arrests. And that just crosses the line. You can't just gas people who are standing in your way in order to access a donut shop or a Home Depot to make a civil arrest for immigration violations. I just had to say my piece.
The operation here in Chicago, it's known as Operation Midway Blitz.
Correct.
Who is being targeted? Is it people who are here illegally and also have criminal histories, or anyone who is here illegally?
No. Right now we are targeting anybody that is here illegally with the criminal record. But that's not to say that if you are here illegally and you are with these people that we're looking for, that you're not going to be arrested.
You're saying that if your agents do in fact find somebody who is here illegally who may not be the target, that person will still be arrested?
If they're there with our target, we will arrest them.
It would be a collateral arrest.
It would be a collateral arrest, correct.
In the summer in Southern California, we saw more sweeping federal immigration enforcement actions in the area that, as you know, triggered a lot of protests there. Should we expect the same type of operations here in Chicago?
Not from ICE. You're not going to see that from ICE. We don't conduct sweeps like that. But you're not going to see that from ICE at all.
You're not targeting Home Depots?
No, we're not targeting Home Depots. Not to say that if our person that we're looking for pulls into a Home Depot, we're gonna arrest them there. But we're not targeting people, day laborers at Home Depot, again, unless it's one of our targets, and that's where he's at.
But you seem to be implying that other agencies could potentially undertake this operation?
I can't speak for other agencies.
ICE in Connecticut is completely out of control. Just earlier this week, ICE agents forcibly entered the Stamford State Courthouse and violently detained 2 individuals inside. In the process, they knocked down a door, battered their way into a bathroom, and pepper sprayed an individual. At no point did they present a judicial warrant. Just yesterday in Norwalk, ICE was on police department property in the parking lot attempting to detain people as they were leaving the police station. Just to be clear, they had no legal right to be there. And when the chief of police told them to go, they finally left. Our courthouses are places to pursue justice and have your claims heard, not hunting grounds. And these violent, lawless, and frankly, unprofessional intimidation tactics by ICE are detrimental to the administration of justice and our public safety. If people are fearful of facing immigration consequences, if they report or act as witness to a crime or pursue their claims in court, they're simply not going to go. This means people won't achieve justice, crimes won't be reported or prosecuted, and criminals will roam free. Not to mention that our judicial marshals and people in the courthouse shouldn't have to be faced with violent arrests and the potential related dangers. If ICE wants to detain people they view as dangerous who are in our courthouses, they've got a simple remedy. Get a damn warrant. It's something our state and local police in Connecticut do every day. My colleagues and I are investigating mechanisms for the state to reassert control over its courthouses, including by preventing federal immigration enforcement from entering without a judicial warrant to make arrests. If the judicial branch won't take action, we should. Our state courthouses and agencies have to be safe for everyone involved, and we as legislators have to take every step necessary and possible to make it so.
Now that you have seen the bigger picture, one thing is clear. The civil rights movement was not just a movement in history, it was a powerful example of people demanding changes when their system around them refused to listen. It transformed American laws, it expanded voting rights, it opened educational opportunities, and inspired movement for justice around the world. But its story also reminds us that progress is a continuous journey. The question raised during that era about equality, opportunity, representation, and fairness are still discussed today in America and beyond. The legacy of civil rights movement is found not only in famous books or famous leaders, but also in the courage of students, workers, families, and communities who stood together for change. Change is one of the highest things that is being needed in the society today. Now we want to hear from you. What do you believe is the greatest achievement of the civil rights movement, and what challenges do you think remain today? Share your opinion in the comment section below, and we will come back in the next video. Please support the Freedom Room by liking, by subscribing, and by sharing your thoughts in the comment section. Turn on the notification bell so you won't miss out on our next video. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.